A couple of years ago, I sat down one evening and did something I probably should have done a long time ago. I added up what I'd spent that year on screws, brackets, wood glue, clamps, and all the little metal bits and pieces I was using to hold my projects together. The number made me a little sick. It was north of $400, and that was just 1 year. Then I started thinking about Japanese carpenters, guys who build entire timber frame houses and temples that have stood for 500 years or more, and they don't use a single screw. No brackets, no glue, just wood locking into wood. And I realized I'd been spending hundreds of dollars a year trying to force wood to behave when there's an entire tradition built around letting the wood hold itself. Today I'm going to walk you through 10 Japanese joinery secrets that I genuinely wish someone had told me before I wasted thousands on the fastener aisle. And stick around to the very end because I'll show you a traditional layout technique that completely changed how I mark and fit tight joints. Let's get into it. What we're really talking about today is a system of woodworking that was perfected over centuries in Japan, where every joint is designed to do the work that we normally hand off to hardware. And the beautiful thing is, you don't need a shop full of exotic tools to start using these ideas. Once you understand the thinking behind them, you can apply them with tools you probably already own. So let me give you some context first, because this isn't just clever engineering. There's a reason these methods developed the way they did. Japan sits on one of the most seismically active regions on Earth. Earthquakes are a fact of life there. And for most of Japanese history, wood was the primary building material, stone and brick crack under lateral force. Metal was expensive and scarce for much of the country's history, so Japanese carpenters, who they called daiku, had to figure out how to build structures entirely from timber that could flex and absorb the energy of an earthquake without collapsing. That's not a philosophical exercise. That's survival. The temples at Nara and Kyoto, some of them over 1,000 years old, are still standing. Not because someone came along and bolted them back together every few decades, but because the joints themselves were designed to move, to absorb stress, and to lock tighter under load instead of pulling apart. The wood species they had access to were remarkable too. Hinoki cypress, which is tight-grained, naturally rot-resistant, and beautifully workable. Sugi cedar, which is lighter and forgiving. These are woods that reward precision, and Japanese craftsmen built an entire system around that precision. There's a guiding idea in Japanese woodworking that I keep coming back to. It roughly translates to reading the wood. Every board has a grain direction, a crown, a tendency to cup or twist as it seasons. And instead of fighting that with clamps and fasteners, the Japanese approach is to understand where that board wants to go and use that natural movement to make the joint stronger. When I first heard that concept, I thought it sounded like poetry. But once I started applying it, I realized it's the most practical thing anyone ever taught me about wood. Now let me walk you through the 10 secrets, starting with the most foundational one. The first thing I learned that changed how I think about joinery is that Japanese joints aren't organized by shape the way we tend to think of them. They're organized by job. There are 2 big categories. The first is tsugite, which are splicing joints. These are used when you need to join 2 pieces of wood end to end to create a longer beam or rail. The second category is shiguchi, which are connecting joints. These are used when 2 pieces meet at an angle, like a post meeting a beam, or a rail meeting a leg. When I first encountered this distinction, it seemed like a small thing, but it completely reorganized how I plan a project. Instead of asking myself, what joint should I use here, I started asking, what job does this joint need to do? Is it resisting a pulling force? Is it transferring a load? Is it joining 2 short boards into one long one? Once you frame it that way, the right joint almost picks itself, and you stop defaulting to screws and brackets just because you're not sure what else to do. The second secret is the one that probably saves the most money right out of the gate. The hozo, which is the Japanese mortise and tenon, is the absolute workhorse of their joinery system. Now, most of us know what a mortise and tenon is, but the Japanese version is cut to a level of precision that makes the joint structural all on its own. No glue, no pins, no draw boring. The tenon is typically cut to fit the mortise with just a few thousandths of an inch of clearance, and when it's seated, it holds by friction and by the geometry of the cut. I started practicing this on scraps of white oak, which behaves similarly to the Japanese white oak they call Nara. The first few attempts were sloppy, but once I got the fit dialed in, I pulled on that joint as hard as I could, and it would not come apart. That's when I realized that every time I'd been reaching for a bottle of wood glue on a mortise and tenon, I was compensating for a joint that wasn't cut well enough. The glue was a bandage, not a solution. By the way, if you are enjoying learning about these ancient methods, I put together something I think you will really appreciate. It is called Kenji's Workshop, and it is a collection of 100 ancient Eastern woodworking secrets for the modern craftsman. Techniques like the ones we are covering today, and a whole lot more. You can grab your copy by scanning the QR code on screen, or just use the first link in the description. All right, let us keep going. Quick thing before we move on. Everything I am sharing today comes from years of studying ancient Eastern woodworking methods, and I have gathered the best of what I have found into a book called Kenji's Workshop. 100 techniques, detailed photos, and real hands-on craftsmanship knowledge you can take straight to your bench. Scan the QR code on screen or hit the link in the description if you want to take these lessons off YouTube and into your shop. Now, back to what I learned. The third secret is the one that really bent my brain when I first understood it. Japanese joinery is cut for a compression fit, meaning the joint is intentionally just slightly tighter than a perfect slip fit. When you drive the tenon home, the wood fibers compress at the contact surfaces, and here's the thing about wood. When it compresses, it doesn't just stay compressed. Over weeks and months, the fibers settle into each other, almost like two pieces of Velcro meshing at a microscopic level. The joint actually gets stronger over time. Compare that to a glued joint, where the adhesive starts degrading the moment it cures, or a screwed joint, where the threads slowly loosen as the wood moves with the seasons. I tested this myself on a small frame made from hard maple. I cut the tenons about 1/64 of an inch fat, tapped them in with a wooden mallet, and left the frame sitting in my shop for 6 months. When I came back and tried to disassemble it, I needed a dead blow hammer to knock those tenons out. 6 months of seasonal humidity changes had only made the joint tighter. That was the moment I stopped trusting glue more than I trusted the wood itself. The fourth secret builds directly on that compression idea. It's the wedged-through tenon, and it's one of the most elegant things I've ever seen in woodworking. You cut your tenon so it passes completely through the mortise and sticks out the other side. Then you saw a thin kerf into the end of the tenon and drive a small hardwood wedge into it. As the wedge spreads the tenon inside the mortise, it creates an outward pressure that locks the joint mechanically. The harder you pull on it, the tighter the wedge bites. I made my first one using a through tenon in white oak with a little wedge cut from a scrap of Osage orange, which is incredibly hard and dense. The wedge was maybe 1/8 of an inch wide at its thickest point. Once I tapped it in, that joint was absolutely immovable. And here's the kicker. If I ever need to take it apart, I just drill out the wedge, tap the tenon back through, and the joint comes apart clean. No torn-out screw holes, no chiseling off dried glue, just clean wood ready to be reassembled. The fifth secret is one of my favorites because it solves a problem that drives every woodworker crazy. You're working with a beautiful slab or a wide board, and a crack starts to develop. Your first instinct is to grab a screw or a metal mending plate and try to stop it from spreading. The Japanese solution is the chigiri, which we call a butterfly key or a bow tie inlay. It's a small piece of hardwood cut in a bow tie shape, and you route or chisel a matching recess across the crack. When you glue the butterfly in place, the wide ends on each side of the crack act like anchors that mechanically prevent the split from traveling any further. I've used these on live edge walnut slabs where a check was running toward the edge and they stopped it cold. The butterfly key I typically cut is about 3 inches long and maybe 1¼ inches at the widest point of each wing, using a dense hardwood like wenge or ebony for contrast. It's stronger than a screw, it looks intentional and beautiful, and it will never rust or corrode. The 6th secret is the dovetail connection, which in Japanese is called ari shiguchi. The word ari actually means ant, because the shape of the joint looks like an ant's head, wider at the tip than at the neck. This geometry is what makes it so powerful. A dovetail can only be assembled and disassembled in one direction, which means it physically cannot pull apart under load from the other directions. Japanese craftsmen use this joint at beam-to-post connections where there's a constant pulling force like the tie beam in a roof structure that's always trying to spread apart. Where a Western framer would use a metal hurricane tie or a handful of structural screws, the Japanese ari shiguchi resists that same force using nothing but geometry. I started using a variation of this on shelf supports in a bookcase I built last year from quarter sawn white oak. Every shelf locks into the side panel with a sliding dovetail, and I haven't used a single screw or pin in the entire piece. It's rock solid. The 7th secret is something that took me a long time to accept because it goes against everything most of us were taught. Japanese joinery intentionally builds in a small gap to allow for seasonal wood movement. We're taught to make everything as tight as possible, no gaps, no daylight, no visible seams. But the Japanese understand that a 1/4 inch wide board of hinoki cypress might expand or shrink by as much as 3/32 of an inch across its width over the course of a year. So they design their joints with just enough room for that movement to happen without cracking the surrounding wood. It's not sloppiness, it's engineering. When I started leaving a deliberate gap of about 1/64 of an inch on certain cross-grain joints, my projects stopped developing those little hairline cracks that used to appear every winter when the shop dried out. The 8th secret is the one that honestly made my jaw drop. It's called the kanawatsugi, and it's a scarf joint used to splice 2 beams end to end. Imagine you need a beam that's 12 feet long, but you only have 2 6-foot pieces. In the Western approach, you'd use a steel mending plate, 4 or 6 lag bolts, and maybe some construction adhesive. The kanawatsugi accomplishes the same thing with no metal at all. The joint uses interlocking steps and a hardwood pin that locks the 2 halves together. When properly cut, the resulting beam is actually stronger at the joint than it is in the middle of either piece, because the interlocking geometry distributes force across a much larger surface area than a simple butt joint ever could. I practiced this on 2 pieces of Douglas fir, each about 4 inches by 6 inches in cross-section, and the joint took me about 3 hours to cut by hand. But when I was done, I could stand on the middle of that spliced beam with my full weight, over 200 pounds, and there was 0 deflection at the joint. 3 hours of careful work replaced about $15 in hardware and produced a result that will outlast any steel plate. The 9th secret is about tools, and it's simpler than you might expect. All of this joinery can be done with just 2 primary tools, a Japanese pull saw called a ryoba and a chisel called a nomi. The ryoba has teeth on both edges, one side for ripping along the grain and one side for cross-cutting. Because it cuts on the pull stroke instead of the push stroke, the blade can be much thinner, typically about 20 thousandths of an inch, compared to a Western back saw at around 30 thousandths. That thinner blade means a thinner kerf, which means less material wasted and more precision on your layout lines. The nomi chisels are designed to be struck with a steel hammer rather than a wooden mallet, And they hold an edge remarkably well because they're laminated with a thin layer of very hard steel on the cutting face, backed by a softer, more flexible steel body. You don't need a $1,500 set. A decent Ryoba costs about $30 to $40, and a set of 4 Nomi chisels in the most useful sizes, 6mm, 12mm, 18mm, and 24mm, runs about $80 to $100. That's your entire toolkit for every joint I've described today. The 10th secret is the sleeper benefit that ties everything together. Every single one of these joints is designed to be demountable. That means you can take them apart without destroying anything. If a beam rots, you knock out the pins, slide the joint apart, replace the damaged piece, and reassemble. If you made a mistake, you disassemble and recut. Compare that to a project held together with screws and glue. You strip the screw holes, you split the wood, prying it apart, you spend 20 minutes chiseling off dried glue, and half your parts are ruined before you even start the repair. I built a workbench 2 years ago using all demountable Japanese joints, and last spring I noticed one of the legs had developed a twist from a piece of wood that wasn't as dry as I thought. I tapped out 2 wedges, slid the leg free, planed it true, and reassembled the whole thing in about 45 minutes. If that bench had been screwed and glued, I'd have been building a new leg from scratch. Let me share some patterns I've noticed over the years, things I used to do myself, that this tradition handles completely differently. No judgment here. I did all of these for longer than I'd like to admit. The first pattern is reaching for glue on every single joint. Most of us do this because we were taught that glue is what makes a joint permanent. But the Japanese approach shows that a properly fitted joint is permanent on its own. The glue is just a crutch for imprecise cuts. The second pattern is over-tightening with screws and clamps to force pieces together. I did this for years because it felt like more pressure meant a stronger connection. But what I learned from Japanese joinery is that if you have to force it, the joint isn't right. A well-cut joint seats with a few taps of a mallet and stays there forever. The third pattern is treating wood movement as an enemy. Most of us try to lock everything rigid and then act surprised when it cracks. The Japanese designed for movement from the very beginning, and their projects stay intact for centuries because of it. The fourth pattern is throwing money at a problem instead of skill. A $2 bracket and 4 screws is faster than learning to cut a proper joint. I get it. But over a lifetime of projects, those $2 fixes add up to thousands, and the result is never as strong or as beautiful as wood meeting wood. The good news is, once you see these patterns for what they are, you can start shifting your approach one project at a time. Now for that bonus tip I promised at the beginning. This is a layout technique I picked up from studying traditional Japanese temple carpenters, and I've never seen it in any American woodworking book I own. Instead of using a pencil or a marking knife to lay out their joints, many Japanese craftsmen use sumi ink, applied with a thin bamboo brush called a sumisashi. The ink line is incredibly fine, thinner than any pencil line you can draw, and it soaks into the wood fiber just enough to stay visible even as you're chiseling right up to it. But here's the real trick. When you're fitting a compression joint, you ink the high spots on one surface, press the 2 pieces together, and the ink transfers to the mating piece exactly where the contact is too tight. Then you pare down only where the ink transferred. Repeat that 2 or 3 times, and you get a perfect fit without guessing. I started doing this about a year ago using a small bottle of Japanese sumi ink that cost me about $8 and a bamboo brush that was another $5. $13 total, and it's improved my joint fitting more than any tool I've ever bought. Before we wrap up, if today's video taught you something new, imagine having 100 techniques like this at your fingertips. That is exactly what Kenji's workshop is. It is my collection of Ancient Eastern Woodworking Secrets for the Modern Craftsman, all in one place, with detailed photos and clear instructions. You can get your copy by scanning the QR code on screen or using the link in the description. Thanks for being here. I will see you next time.